They say a house is just wood and stone, but not this one. This one holds my entire life. Every joy, every tear, every heartbeat that ever mattered to me. My husband, Richard, built this house 50 years ago with his bare hands. I still remember the day he placed the final brick and said, "Now we'll never be homeless, Evie. This roof will always be yours." He smiled at me, dust and sweat on his brow, but his eyes full of love. We raised our only son Michael here. The front porch saw his first steps, the hallway echoed his laughter, and the kitchen witnessed our Sunday dinners filled with music and stories. And then, far too soon, that same kitchen was filled with silence, the kind that comes after loss. When Richard passed away, I felt half of me go with him. But I couldn't leave the home we'd built. I stayed because it was the only thing still breathing with his memory. Years later, when Michael died in an accident, I thought the world had ended. But God gave me a reason to stay alive. My grandson Ryan. I raised Ryan in this house. Every morning, I'd pack his lunch and kiss his cheek before school. He used to say, "Nana, when I grow up, I'll build you a palace." I'd laugh and say, "This old house is my palace, sweetheart." We used to bake cookies together. He'd get flour all over his nose and shout, "Don't tell Mom." I'd promise not to. Even though there was no mom left to tell. He was my sunshine in those dark years. My reason to smile again. But people change. Or maybe the world changes them. The first time Ryan brought Melissa home, I saw that hunger in her eyes. Not for love, but for things. She praised the house too much. Looked around like she was already rearranging it in her mind. "Oh, it's beautiful, Mrs. Parker," she said. "So much potential. You could make a fortune if you ever decided to sell." I smiled politely but said nothing. I didn't like the way she said sell. This house wasn't a thing to be sold. It was a memory carved into walls. After they married, things began to shift quietly. Like furniture moved just enough to make you stumble at night. Ryan stopped sitting on the porch with me. Stopped asking for my pies. He began spending evenings glued to his phone while Melissa spoke to him in low tones I wasn't meant to hear. One evening, as I folded laundry in my room, I heard them talking downstairs. "She's getting older, Ryan," Melissa said. "We need our own space. It's time she moved out." Ryan's voice trembled. "But this is her house." "For now," she replied coldly. Those two words, "for now," hit me like ice water. I stood frozen behind the door, my hands clutching a towel that smelled of lavender and heartbreak. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the ticking clock and wondering when love had turned into calculation. In the morning, Ryan greeted me with his usual, "Good morning, Grandma," but I could see the unease in his eyes. I wanted to ask him what Melissa had said, to remind him of the nights he slept in my arms when he had nightmares, but I didn't. I simply smiled and said, "Morning, dear. The coffee's ready." Because sometimes silence is stronger than words. But deep inside, I felt a quiet storm forming, not of anger but of knowing. Something was coming. Something that would test every ounce of love I'd ever given. And though my heart was old and tired, it still knew one truth. No one throws away a woman who built her own home with her wrinkled hands. The sky was heavy that evening. The kind of gray that seeps into your bones before the rain even starts. I could feel it coming. The same way I could feel a storm brewing inside my house long before the thunder outside began to growl. For days, Melissa had been complaining. About the way I folded towels. About the old floral curtains. About my tea kettle whistling too loud. "It's just outdated," she'd say with a sigh, running her fingers along the walls like a realtor appraising value instead of a woman living in a home. Ryan stayed quiet through it all. That was the part that hurt most, his silence. He'd grown into a tall, handsome man, but the boy who used to defend me against playground bullies was gone. In his place stood someone who avoided my eyes, like looking at me might remind him of who he used to be. That evening I made dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes and green beans, just like I used to when he was little. I thought maybe the smell of home might bring him back, even for a moment. But when I called them to the table, Melissa wrinkled her nose. "Ryan and I already ordered takeout," she said, without even looking up from her phone. I stood there, holding the serving spoon, pretending the sting in my chest was just the heat from the oven. "Oh," I said softly. "I didn't know." Ryan finally looked up. Grandma, you didn't have to cook. You should relax. I like cooking, I whispered. But the words felt small in a room that no longer belonged to me. After dinner, or rather after they finished their takeout in front of the television, Melissa began again. Ryan, I talked to that manager at the nursing home. They have a lovely private room available for her. Her. Not Grandma. Just her. Ryan's jaw tightened. Melissa, please. No, Ryan, she interrupted, her voice sharp. This is ridiculous. She's old, she can't handle this place alone, and we need to move forward with our lives. We can sell this house and... That's enough. My voice broke the air like thunder. Both of them turned toward me, startled. I stood there, my hands trembling but my back straight. This is my home, I said quietly. Your grandfather built it for me with his own hands. Melissa laughed, not loudly but cruelly. With all due respect, Evelyn, memories don't pay the bills. It's time to be practical. I stared at her, then at Ryan. And you? I asked. Do you agree? For a moment he didn't answer. His eyes darted between us, full of confusion, frustration, and cowardice. Finally he muttered, Maybe it's for the best, Grandma. You'll be comfortable there. Comfortable. That word sounded like a curse. The room went silent except for the ticking of the clock. The same clock that had hung there for 50 years. The one that used to count down to family dinners and Christmas mornings. When I didn't speak, Melissa sighed. Fine. If you won't leave willingly. Melissa. Ryan snapped, but it was too late. The next few minutes are still a blur. Raised voices, a suitcase dragged from my closet, my clothes tossed carelessly inside. And then, the sound I'll never forget. The door slamming behind me. The sky finally broke open. And rain poured down like the heavens themselves were grieving. I stood there on the porch, holding my old suitcase, watching the light from the living room flicker against the window. Through the glass, I could see Ryan's shadow. For a second, I thought he'd come out. He didn't. So I turned and walked. My shoes sank into the mud, the rain mixing with my tears. Every step felt like leaving another memory behind. By the time I reached the gate, a soft voice called out. Evelyn? My goodness. It was Mrs. Lang, my neighbor for over 30 years. She rushed out with an umbrella and wrapped her coat around me. What happened? She asked, eyes wide with disbelief. I just shook my head. I suppose. I've been evicted from love. She didn't ask again. She just led me into her home, sat me by the fire and poured me tea. As the warmth crept back into my hands, I stared into the flames and whispered to myself, let the storm have its say. Morning will know my truth. And in that quiet moment, somewhere between heartbreak and resolve, I realized something. They might have thrown me out of my house, but they hadn't taken my strength. 3 days had passed since that night, 3 long, silent days. I stayed at Mrs. Lang's house, sleeping in her guest room, surrounded by old floral wallpaper and the smell of lavender soap. She was kind, never asking too many questions, just leaving tea by my bedside every morning. But kindness couldn't stop the ache. Every night, I dreamt of my house, the creak of the stairs, the ticking clock, the soft hum of the refrigerator at midnight. Home wasn't just a place I lived in. It was where my entire life was folded neatly like linens in a drawer. And now my grandson and his wife were living there, as if I had never existed. On the 4th morning, I put on my best coat, the one Richard bought me on our 40th anniversary, and told Mrs. Lang, I have somewhere to go. She nodded, eyes understanding more than words ever could. The walk to the lawyer's office felt heavier than my years. The cold wind bit at my face, but my mind was clear. Mr. Harris had been our family lawyer for decades. A thin man with silver hair, sharp glasses, and a voice that always carried calm authority. He looked surprised when I stepped into his office. Mrs. Parker, he said, standing immediately. It's been so long. What brings you here? I sat down slowly, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Mr. Harris, I need to ask you something important about the house. His brow furrowed slightly. The house? Is there a problem? I gave a small bitter smile. You could say that. I told him everything. How Ryan and his wife had thrown me out, how they were living there now as if it was theirs. When I finished, Mr. Harris leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. I'm so sorry to hear that, Evelyn. But I can tell you this much. That house has always been yours. I blinked. Mine. He opened an old drawer, pulling out a yellowed folder. Your husband transferred full ownership to you after Michael's passing. It's under your name alone. There's no record of any sale or transfer to Ryan. For a moment, the words didn't sink in. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. You mean, I whispered, they threw me out of my own house? Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses. Legally, yes. They have no right to live there without your consent. I stared at the papers. My name printed neatly at the top, Evelyn Grace Parker, owner of the property. My fingers trembled as I touched the document. My husband's old promise echoed in my mind. You'll never be homeless, Evie. This roof will always be yours. A warmth spread through my chest. Not anger, not vengeance, just clarity. What do I need to do? I asked quietly. Mr. Harris looked at me with gentle respect. I can prepare a legal notice of ownership. They'll have to vacate the property immediately. You can reclaim your home, Evelyn. I nodded slowly. Do it. He began typing the documents, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the keyboard. The sound was steady. Each key pressing felt like a heartbeat bringing me back to life. By the time I left the office, the clouds had lifted. The sun wasn't shining yet, but there was light enough to see the path ahead. That evening, Ryan called. I could hear the panic in his voice. Grandma, what is this letter? Some lawyer says we have to leave the house. There's got to be a mistake. I listened quietly, then said softly, no mistake, dear. The house you live in, it isn't yours. It never was. He stuttered. But you can't do this to us. Can't I? I said, my tone calm, almost kind. You told me I wasn't welcome in that house. I'm simply taking your advice and finding my own way back home. He fell silent. I could hear Melissa in the background, her voice shrill and angry, demanding answers. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet, a small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. For the first time in years, I didn't feel weak or forgotten. The papers weren't just proof of ownership. They were proof that I still mattered. That my husband's promise had not been broken. As I looked out the window that night, I whispered to the stars, Richard, you clever man, you always protected me. And in that moment I knew. Tomorrow, I would walk back into my home. Not as a broken old woman, but as the rightful owner. The morning I went back to my house, the sky was calm. The kind of blue that only comes after a long storm. I wore my favorite gray shawl, the one Richard used to say made me look too elegant to be ordinary. My hands trembled a little as I locked the door behind me at Mrs. Lang's, but my heart felt steady. The car Mr. Harris sent pulled up at exactly 9. Inside sat 2 men, polite, professional. One was an officer there to enforce the order, the other from the court. I sat between them silently as we drove down the familiar road, my mind wandering through decades of memories. When we turned onto Maple Lane, my breath caught in my chest. There it was, my house. The white paint a little chipped, the rose bushes overgrown, but still standing proud, just like me. Through the living room window, I saw movement, Ryan and Melissa rushing around. Boxes were stacked near the door, papers scattered across the table. They'd already received the eviction notice, it seemed. When the car stopped, I stepped out slowly, cane in hand, each step deliberate. The crunch of gravel beneath my shoes was the sweetest sound I'd heard in months. Ryan opened the door before I even reached the porch. His face was pale, his eyes red. Not from tears but from sleepless nights. Grandma, he said, voice trembling. You can't mean to do this. You can't throw us out. I looked at him. My grandson, the boy I once cradled in my arms, the boy who had turned me out into the rain. And I felt pity. Not anger. Just a deep, aching pity. I didn't throw you out, Ryan, I said softly. You threw me out. I'm only walking back through the door you closed. Melissa appeared behind him, her arms crossed tightly. This is unbelievable. You can't just take everything from us. We've made plans. We were going to renovate. I turned my eyes to her, calm and steady. You can renovate your own home when you have one. This one was never yours. The officer stepped forward then, handing them the final order. His tone was polite but firm. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker, you have 1 hour to vacate the premises." Melissa's face flushed crimson. She turned on Ryan. "Do something." "She can't." But he didn't move. He just stared at me, shame written across his features. "Grandma," he whispered, "I'm sorry." For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I stepped closer, my hand trembling as I touched his cheek. "The same way I used to when he was a boy." "I know, dear," I said gently. "But some lessons, life teaches only once." They packed in silence. No shouting, no scenes, just the sound of boxes closing, doors opening, and the final chapter of their arrogance being sealed shut. When the last car pulled away, I stood alone on the porch. The air smelled like rain and roses. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. Home. Inside, everything was just as I remembered. My rocking chair still sat in the corner. The ticking clock still sang its steady song. Even the old photo of Richard on the mantel seemed to be smiling. I made myself a cup of tea, Earl Grey with honey, and carried it to the window seat. Outside, the sunlight spilled across the garden, warm and forgiving. As I sipped, I whispered softly, "We're home again, Richard." For the first time in months, peace settled over me like a soft blanket. No shouts, no bitterness, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing justice had come, not through rage, but through truth. Because revenge, when served with kindness, burns deeper than cruelty ever could. I leaned back in my chair, the tea warm in my hands, and looked at the world beyond my window. The birds sang again. The roses swayed gently in the wind. And I smiled. Love had once built this home. Betrayal had tried to break it. But in the end, dignity, patience, and a woman's quiet strength had restored it. As the day faded into gold, I whispered one last time to the photograph on the wall. "You were right, Richard. Love forgives, but it never forgets." And with that, I took another sip of tea. The sweetest tea I'd ever tasted.